Great. We are ready to go. Alexander, let me do a quick check. How are you doing, Alexander? How are things going?
Very well. I'm somewhat dismayed by the delusions of our rulers in Britain as the world falls apart around us. But personally, I'm extremely well and very pleased to be on our program again today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think everyone knows what we're going to talk about. As I put in the title, it's whatever other news there is. But let me just send a quick message to locals here. Mm-hmm. And Afghanistan. What else? What else is there?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going on, actually, but this is definitely sucking up the oxygen of just about everything else.
It's sucking up the oxygen, but it's also rearranging all the various pieces. So now, let's just say, I mean, into domestic politics in Britain and the US, Afghanistan is now influencing and changing the pieces there. The way in which events are playing out in Eurasia between China and Russia and Iran. Again, Afghanistan is playing a role there. The Turkish foreign minister talks to the Chinese foreign minister. What do they talk about? Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is at the center of everything at the moment, and it will remain so for a few weeks.
Yeah, Putin made some calls as well, spoke with Macron.
Absolutely.
He's working the lines as well. It seems that everyone is calling world leaders except for the one leader that matters. if you could call him a leader, but he's the only one that's not making calls.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Nor is Blinken. I mean, Blinken isn't hardly making any calls at all at the moment. It's really very bizarre. The whole thing is weird, actually. It's eerie.
Weird. Yeah. Very weird, and that's what's got me worried. It's very weird. So welcome everybody to another Friday live stream. We're just going to go straight to questions. We got a bunch of questions, super chats. I'll go to the chat as well and pull out some questions. And thank you, Valies, €20 super chat, Ed, for moderating. Let me see if there's any other moderators in here. Any other wrenches, blue wrenches? I don't see it. If anyone wants a blue wrench, let me know. By the way, help out Valies to moderate the chat. Usually GEC's in here or Zariel, Spartan Warrior Queen, but it looks like Valies, you're me and you, Valies. It's me and you moderating. But if anyone wants a wrench, let me know, and maybe I'll hand out some wrenches. Let's just get into it, Alexander. I've got a bunch of questions. They all revolve around Afghanistan, or they're connected to Afghanistan, because, as you said, a lot of the pieces are being rearranged now. The geopolitical pieces are being rearranged. So let's just go straight to it. And Valies, thank you once again for opening things up with your €20 super chat. And Mark Hewitt came in before the live stream, and he said, the UK cannot rely on the US anymore. Defense spending will have to increase sharply. Bojo's vanity projects like HS2 and the Green New Deal to go.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, they are vanity projects. They need to go anyway. And yes, I think Britain should start to take care of its own defense and pursue more independent foreign policies. But that has to be done in a realistic way, sending ships all the way around the world to the South China Sea because, the US has problems with China, or, going into the bear's den near Crimea. That doesn't help Britain. What we need to do is focus on our own defenses, pursue our own economic policies, put aside our imperial delusions, and spend our money wisely. If we do all of these things, then we will be fine. We are a strong country. We're a stable country. We have many cards to play, and we could actually play them skillfully. But we haven't been doing that for a long, long time, and we didn't do that, by the way, under previous governments as well as Johnson's.
Okay, we have another question here from before the program, and it comes from Toilet Sauce, who says, has the way the U.S. handled the evacuation from Afghanistan opened some people's eyes in Ukraine? Apparently, Ukrainian soldiers, why are they there at all? Didn't know there was an evacuation. Nobody told them.
Well, I think it has opened eyes, not just, of course, in Ukraine, but in many places. And I can tell you for an absolute fact, because I follow the Ukrainian news, the Ukrainians are shocked because, of course, they had been relying on the United States. They've already been worried for some time over the last few weeks and months that Ukraine is not getting the backing from the US that they'd expected. They saw how the US failed to back them during the April crisis, and already there's been concerns in Ukraine. And of course, there was that disastrous visit from their point of view when Blinken and Nuland came along to Ukraine in May and said, well, basically, we're not going to support you much longer, but in the meantime, you've got to open up everything to American investors so that we can help ourselves basically to what's there. But Ukrainians are shocked, and it's not just Ukrainians, it's people around the world. And the United States, to be very clear about this, at this moment in time, Ukraine is going to be lower in its list of concerns. The major concern it has is going to be Taiwan. What the United States will want to do now is not so much reassure Ukraine, I suspect, as find some kind of accommodation with Russia to leave Ukraine alone so that this vexed issue can be pushed down the agenda. So Ukraine is disillusioned, alarmed, frightened, but as everybody has seen, the United States and certainly this administration cannot be relied on in a crisis.
Yeah, Scott Miller says that Kiev Post had a piece about Ukrainians feeling betrayed.
Yeah. Well,
that's
yes.
And the Kiev Post is very U.S. pro-government as well. So that
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, can I just say, I mean, feeling betrayed, I hope what that really means is feeling realistic, because Ukraine's foreign policy and domestic policy and every aspect of Ukrainian policy over the last 7 years has been completely unrealistic. It's been based on fantasies about the United States, based on fantasies about Europe, based upon fantasies about Ukraine itself. And I think if this has brought the Ukrainians down with a thump, and that they're now going to start embracing realism, well, so much the better. Of course, the concern is that Zelensky is now heading to Washington. He's going to have a meeting with Biden, and there's going to be these reassuring words that come from the United States and from the administration about how they support Ukraine, how they will defend Ukraine. Well, I hope that Ukrainians are now able to see past those words and understand that the United States under this administration is not to be relied upon. And at the end of the day, under any administration, it will pursue its own interests.
Yeah. Better wake up. They better wake up. What can you say? From another super chat, which is once again connected to Ukraine and to the U.S.'s support of Ukraine, is from Violent Merchant, who says, Israel just allowed Privet Bank to serve a $600 million suit against Kolomoisky. Any hope to leverage Kolomoisky to rat on NATO sponsorship of the Maidan coup or the money laundering apparatus used by the U.S. neocons?
No, I think it's entirely possible. He's actually talked about Kolomoisky. By the way, I should explain to our viewers, is one of the most notorious, hardline, corrupt, and violent Ukrainian oligarchs. One thing that probably deters him from developing a closer realignment with Russia is that it's well known that Putin particularly loathes him. Putin's made public comments about Kolomoisky in which he's called him straightforwardly a rat. I mean, he absolutely can't stand the man. But nonetheless, Kolomoisky is coming under huge pressure, and he's a person who was heavily involved in leveraging Zelensky into power. And he's already spoken about the need for Ukraine to adopt more realistic foreign policies and to start to pursue a rapprochement with Russia. So it may be that he will realign with some of the political forces in Ukraine, which have already been getting stronger, by the way, which do want to see a change in policy. And certainly the fact that he's coming under this kind of pressure will drive him in that direction. I would add that the fact that Israel has taken this step is going to be a particular shock for Kolomoisky because he's Jewish. He's had very close connections with the Jewish community in Ukraine. And of course, he's very, very connected to Israel as well. So he will feel very, very badly let down by the fact that Israel is allowing these proceedings to take place. So we'll see how it works out.
Yeah. Nancy says, I love my Duran t-shirt. Thank you very much, Nancy. Everybody smash that like. Thank you, Valias. Thank you, Alan, for grabbing those wrenches and moderating. If anyone else wants a wrench, let me know. I'll hand out a couple of wrenches today so we can help out because it gets hard. There's 3 of us now moderating, me, Valias, and Alan. And when there's a lot of people in here, it's tough. But we have a great community. We have great questions, Alexander, and we've got a lot of questions coming in really fast. So let's get to them because what a news cycle. What a news cycle. From Toilet Sauce, he says, Germany also hasn't covered itself with glory, given that they managed to evacuate all the beer and wine. Couldn't be asked to fly on a weekend, leaving German staff and personnel behind. Isn't that the big story here? One of the big stories. All these countries leaving their people behind.
Absolutely. I mean, there's just a story today. I was reading it. I read it as I got up this morning about how the British, for example, have left or are leaving or have been leaving. Well, there's a huge outcry about it. Afghan guards who were protecting the British embassy in Kabul, how they've been left behind and they weren't able to board the plane because they were hired by a private contractor instead of directly by the British government. But I mean, all of the countries are disgracing themselves. And I would add also, by the way, people who still believe the myth of German efficiency, I hope that this is a wake-up call. Germany still has a very efficient, lots of efficiencies in parts of its society and economy. But as a person who knows Germany very well and who goes there often, I can say that overall and by and large, a lot of what you hear about the Germans running things like clockwork, being organized, being structured, doing things well, doing things better than other people, it's an absolute myth. And it's not just the mess of the evacuation. When the Germans sent troops to Afghanistan as part of the NATO mission, they basically all stuck to their base and did absolutely nothing. And the Americans and the British who were working with them were utterly exasperated and very angry about the way in which they felt that the German military weren't operating properly. And of course, when you have people like AKK running the show and Ursula previously running the show with the German military, well, what do you expect ultimately?
All right. Thank you very much, Cosmic Rain. You got a wrench. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. We're loaded up. GEC is in the house as well. Awesome to have GEC 812 in the house. Good to have you here moderating as well. Alexander from Mark Hewitt. What did you think of General Milley's good idea response when a reporter put a suggestion to him that Bagram should be recaptured? Yeah, Mark actually sent this before we started the live stream, and I didn't hear this remark. And I sent a message to Mark, and I said, really? I said, well, he just said good. He said good idea. Should we retake Bagram? Good idea.
Well, after all, he's only the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I mean, giving him advice on military matters is something we should all be doing because quite clearly the poor man doesn't really understand these things himself. So he needs to be jogged into thinking of all of these good ideas. The abandonment of Bagram was an absolute, complete disgrace. It was, Alex has been hammering away at it, and he's absolutely right. And I read it. Absolutely. Well, and now I notice, and Alex was the first, I think, but maybe they're listening to him because it's now starting to appear all across the American media. I mean, Washington Examiner was writing about it. National Review wrote a strong piece about this. It's the last place you should have abandoned. I mean, you start with places on the periphery, you bring all your people in, then step by step, you complete the evacuation in a public way, and Bagram is the place where you carry it out from, and that's the last place you leave. Well, they did leave it. They left it almost at the beginning. They did it like thieves in the night. They left it at 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's the problem I have with it. Sorry, that's how they left.
I know. They gave away their primary strategic asset. And I was now reading, actually, an absolutely terrifying piece by Scott Ritter, who's a former Marine officer. And he's pointed out that Kabul airport is surrounded by high ground and built up areas. It's actually a trap. If the Taliban wanted to attack Kabul airport, they could lob missiles and mortar shells onto it, and they could easily intercept aircraft that are flying in. It would be an incredibly easy place to carry out the most unbelievable debacle. So, I mean, it was an absolutely crazy thing to do. And General Miller ought to be sacked. I mean, I'm being absolutely straightforward about this, because as the chief military commander in the United States, the person with overall charge of the military, he is ultimately responsible for these crazy decisions. And I'm sorry to say this, but I think that retaking Bagram Air Base is probably well, I'm sure it is militarily still possible. The politics of this are now becoming incredibly difficult. I mean, the US troops to be redeployed to Bagram would have to presumably leave Kabul airport, where, as I said, they could be easily attacked if they were to try to do that. They would have to presumably fly to Bagram by helicopter, which, as I said, they could be easily shot down. And of course, it's probably going to be very difficult to reinforce them, because in order to get troops into Afghanistan, you need to overfly countries like Pakistan and Iran, and indeed Russia and the Central Asian states, who are busy trying to work with the Taliban to try to rebuild a government there. So it's not at all clear to me that those countries will agree to let that happen. They're allowing US troops to go to Kabul airport in order to carry out the evacuation. But I don't think they will support a military operation of that kind carried out by the US military now. So an absolute debacle, an insane thing to give up Bagram in the way that the US did, and probably, I'm sorry to say, an irreversible one. And as for General Miller, talking like that, saying, well, that's a good idea, why didn't I think of that? Well, all I can say is, I mean, what kind of a general, what kind of a commander is he? I mean, he's more someone out of Gilbert and Sullivan, it seems to me. I mean, a comic opera general than a real one.
Yeah. Hello to everyone in Australia from the unlivable and lockdown country in the world, Australia, New Zealand. Look, Australia, New Zealand, heavy lockdowns. We got elections in Canada, snap elections on the 20th. The UK, I don't know. I don't understand the politics of the UK. Why are they getting involved in accepting blame for Afghanistan? We've done a video on this. It's utterly bizarre why Boris Johnson wants to run into the fire instead of try to extract himself out of the fire. Anyway, you may want to discuss that as well. But a lot of moving pieces, and I just have a feeling that all of this stuff is somehow connected. Afghanistan, pandemic, lockdowns, inflation, money printing. I don't know. Maybe in a few months we'll be able to connect the pieces just a little bit better. But for now, it's just still floating around in my head, and I'm trying to connect everything up. Jay Paris says that retaking Bagram would be suicide. Imagine the response of the Taliban. Yeah, that would be.
No, absolutely.
There's no mistake. The U.S. could do a number of things militarily if they wanted to. Very devastating, terrible things. But the response would just be absolute chaos. I mean, beyond what we have now, it would just be. I couldn't even imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, the other reason they won't do it, and I'll tell you straight away why they wouldn't do it, is because it would be an admission that it was a mistake to leave Bagram like that in the first place. And the thing you will have noticed is that this administration is not admitting that it has done anything wrong. And that's one of the most astonishing things about that. When there was the Bay of Pigs, the attempted invasion of Cuba in 1961, JFK didn't just take responsibility. He actually came forward and said that, we made mistakes. We did things wrong. We were at fault And that was even though the plan was actually drawn up whilst his predecessor, Eisenhower, was still president. This administration has a completely different approach. It's blame someone else, BSE, as we would say in Britain.
Yeah. Reckless Abandon, you got a wrench. Thank you very much, Reckless Abandon. Brian says, congrats on the 150,000 subs. Thank you, Brian, very much. Boy, that was a hard 150. Let me tell you. Every time I look at the subs, sometimes when I look at the subs, I see like we've added 10 subs. Then I do a refresh and I see they've taken away 8 or 9 like right away. Anyway, whatever. But thank you very much to everybody that's sub. Remember to check your subscription as well and your bell notification, please. But thank you to everybody. We did it together. We all did it together, and we'll continue to broadcast everybody, whether it's on YouTube or Locals, Odyssey, BitChute, Super U, Rumble. Rumble is also starting to grow now, which is good. Rit says, Italy and Germany are core nations in Afghanistan. Probably heavy number of citizens of these countries stranded. Their troops have left.
Absolutely. You know what's going to happen? Italy and Germany are going to talk to Russia and China. That's what they have to do. Dominic Raab.
Draghi did as well.
Draghi
spoke with Putin.
Absolutely. Draghi and Macron. And Merkel, of course, is going to Moscow in a few days, and she's going to speak to Putin as well. But they're going to be talking to China and Russia. Dominic Raab, our absolutely incompetent foreign secretary, telephoned Wang Yi, and I've just done a program about that, which will be appearing later today, I think, on our channel, which will Wang Yi just tore into him. He just shredded the poor man, telling him all. Well, you'll see. We'll see on my video.
Give us a preview. Give us a preview.
He gave Raab an absolute lecture. He said, you got Afghanistan completely wrong. The military solution was the wrong one. You've got to work with the forces that are actually there. You've got to try and forget all these wars and post-imperial delusions that you have, and try and play a constructive role in the country instead of a destructive one. It's actually devastating. It actually excoriated the entire Blairite humanitarian interventionist foreign policy that the British are so stuck on. And this directly after a debate in the British House of Commons, which I'm going to say straightforwardly, I thought was borderline insane, actually, in the way that it took place. But anyway, why did Raab telephone Wang Yi? Because he's hoping to get Wang Yi's help to get the British people out of Kabul. He's not really happy to call Lavrov Russia's Lavrov, because of course he knows that if he calls Lavrov will be even more critical of Raab than Wang Yi has been. Lavrov and Raab, by the way, had a massive row on the phone a few weeks ago, and so that's what they're all going to do. They're all going to have to come along, talk to the Russians and the Chinese. The Russians and the Chinese have embassies in Kabul. We no longer have. They're talking to the Taliban in a way that we don't do. They have their people fanning out across Afghanistan in every part of it. They can help. But my God, what a humiliation. We have to turn to these two countries, which we've been spending the best part of our time over the last few months criticizing and saying that there are enemies and our adversaries. And of course, China is a real challenge. Russia could have been, a friend in need, and we've turned it away.
Yeah, the interesting part about all of this is that it seems that the Chinese and the Russians, maybe the Iranians as well, I don't know. It seems like they are definitely consulting, I guess would be the word, with the Taliban as far as how to act like a proper government.
Yeah,
I can't think of another way to express it, but they're kind of, teaching them how to present themselves to the world so that they could potentially get recognized by other countries. That's the way it seems.
Absolutely. They're all coordinated with each other. The Chinese and the Russians are talking to each other all the time. The Chinese and the Russians are talking to the Iranians. They're also talking to the Pakistanis. All of these countries are working together, trying to give the Taliban advice, telling the Taliban, look, you've won this war, but winning the war is easy. Winning the peace is much harder. You have a limited time window, because the economic situation is going to be very difficult in Afghanistan. And what you want is a stable, peaceful, united Afghanistan. And it's up to you, because if you mess up this time, you're going to have more war, more crisis in Afghanistan, and that's bad for you, and it's bad for us, and it's bad for everybody. So they're trying to mentor the Taliban. Now, to some extent, up to now, the Taliban has been receptive. But I noticed that one of these officials, who is the Russian official, a man called Kaburov, said that 2/3 of the Taliban are listening, 1/3 is not. So it's, God help us, it's a hard slog, a difficult job, but at least they're trying.
What do you think of General Milley, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Alexander?
I
Real
think,
quick, what are your thoughts?
Trump would have sacked him, and that's what should have happened. I mean, he should be sacked. I mean, he's failed, and he's failed abysmally. And I come back and say this: why hasn't he gone to Afghanistan? Why is he not in Kabul at this moment in time at the airport? Who is in charge at Kabul airport? I wonder sometimes whether there's anybody in charge. Milley has failed, and he's failed entirely. Of course, he's succeeded in other things. He's very good at, talking about identity issues and, well, all the sort of issues.
Going after his own citizens.
Absolutely,
Going after his own citizens.
Absolutely. The real threat is from within, apparently. It's not. It's so. I mean, that's. He's very good at that. I mean, he's a superb political general. As a commander of men, as a commander of troops on the ground, well, the situation in Kabul, as of now, speaks for itself, because the US military are in charge at Kabul airport. He is the senior military officer, and he is failing, and he's failing abysmally. And there are plenty of people in the United States, in the US military, who could organize this operation well. There are 44 four-star generals in the United States. Let's find one who knows his job.
Yeah. Monica Ball, $8.99 super chat, says, congratulations on a brilliant channel. Would you please start covering Brazil, the international interferences and the Supreme Court shenanigans? Things are getting very delicate there. Yes, they have elections coming up as well.
Absolutely.
And pretty much all of Latin America has completely lurched to the left in a big, big way. And Brazil hasn't done that yet, but we're going to have to monitor it.
It seems to me that he's heading in that direction. I mean, that's exactly where he's going. And, when we talk about the left, I mean, we're talking about the AOC left. Let's be absolutely clear about that. I mean, not the old left of Latin America that we all used to remember from once upon a time. It's the AOC left, and they're about to take over Brazil. And God knows, I mean, I still struggle to comprehend that. But it's happening as we talk. You're absolutely right. And Brazil is the big one. I mean, Brazil is the colossus of Latin America. So what goes on there is going to affect the whole of the rest of the region.
I wonder how Brazil feels after seeing Biden's debacle in Afghanistan.
Well, I'm sure that the kind of people we're talking
Bolsonaro
about
wasn't too close with Biden, I think.
Bolsonaro
he was definitely a Trump.
Bolsonaro was absolutely an ally of Trump. I mean, he doesn't have any time for Biden at all. Nor, by the way, do the Democrats have any time for him. I mean, that's the thing to remember. I mean, he's one of the sort of holdouts from the Trump era. And I've been reading in the media about some of the things that have been happening in Brazil. I mean, Poland as well. They're now really pushing hard against the Law and Justice Party in Poland, whose leader, Kaczynski, was also very close to Trump.
Yeah. Let's see. ICT Hulu says, can you discuss India? I believe the future for the world revolves around their choices. We talked about India in a show we did a couple of days ago. And for us, it was one of the countries that people are not talking about, but a country that will be absolutely affected by what's just happened in Afghanistan, specifically Afghanistan and Pakistan. So India is a country that we absolutely need to keep an eye on?
Absolutely, it's pivotal, because I'm going to say this. I mean, Brazil may one day become a great power. It has the latent potential to be that. India, I think, is much further on the road. It's got a powerful military. It's got a big industrial base. It's got enormous problems, and large parts of it still are desperately poor. But it's definitely a country that you can imagine and conceive of as a great power very soon. And of course, what it's been doing recently is, because it's got a historically tense relationship with China and is an adversary of Pakistan, which is an ally of China, over the last few years, it's been aligning to some degree with the United States. And now what it's seen is what the United States, what guarantees and promises of support from the United States actually mean in a country, Afghanistan, which is right in India's neighborhood, where India has been heavily involved. And I should say the Indian military provided a lot of training to the Afghan Army's officer corps, for example, and where, India has vital interests. Well, they have seen how spectacularly the US has failed. And I think India needs to rethink this relationship that it has at the moment with the United States, at least whilst this administration is in office, and start asking itself whether this alignment with the United States that it was making really serves India's interests. And maybe what India needs to do is to start to broaden its foreign policy again, work towards perhaps Russia, which was historically a very friendly country with India and wants to remain so, and perhaps rebalance its relations so that it sort of forms a kind of, if you like, a kind of axis with Russia, which perhaps draws Russia a little bit further away from China and sort of rebalances the Eurasian system. It's a complicated answer to an important question, but India is vitally important. It's got the tools to play an active foreign policy, and it needs to start using them more skillfully than it has been doing up to now. And perhaps, and I say this, understanding the implications of it, it needs to rely less on the US. It's been given a lesson that ultimately the United States in these sort of issues cannot be fully relied upon.
Yeah. The whole world is changing now from this one event, and every country, as we said in the beginning, is starting to rethink their relationship with the United States and the geopolitical fallout from what's happened in Afghanistan. But it's really funny, ironic, that during the campaign, it was Biden, Harris, the Democrats, that ran on a platform, at least when foreign policy was concerned, that the Trump White House alienated all of the United States' partners, that the Trump White House had a terrible foreign policy, that it was the Trump White House that has embarrassed the United States on a foreign stage. And it was going to be the Biden-Harris administration that was going to bring back respectability to the United States. Their entire platform was based on that. Even their slogan that they were using up until a couple of days ago, and they may still be using it, is America is back, right? This one event is absolute karma, irony. I don't know what is the word, but my God, this one event has just shown that it definitely was not Trump, and it definitely is not Trump that has now alienated all of the United States' allies and their adversaries and their enemies. Now, everyone is now looking at this decision and saying, what the F do we do now?
Absolutely. And can I just point out also that, of course, this is just one decision. I mean, it's the spectacular one. It's the one where we've got all the big, vivid television pictures which have been broadcast around the world. And, very disturbing and upsetting some of them are. But every single big decision that the Biden administration has made up to now has turned out badly. Every one of them. I mean, there was the April crisis in Ukraine, which we covered extensively on this channel. There have been the way in which they've been negotiating with Iran, which hasn't gone well, to put it mildly. And there have been the negotiations with China, which have been an absolute shocking mess, with the Chinese steamrolling over Blinken in Alaska, and then doing the same all over again with Sherman in Tianjin, and with the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi talking in Tianjin with the Taliban instead of talking to Sherman, who then goes back to Washington and pretends to have talked with Wang Yi when she was really talking with someone else. Now, you know, the foreign ministries around the world, they pick up all of this and they see all of this, and they're coming to realize that this is an absolutely amateur, absolutely shocking outfit in terms of its foreign policy. And then on top of all of that, they now have this enormous debacle with what happened in Afghanistan in full view. So you're absolutely right. I mean, Trump, all that criticism of him, all that abuse, that torrent of abuse for 4 years, that he was volatile, that he was unpredictable, that he was reckless, that he was, you know, people were talking about him being insane even. I mean, you know, he was mad, that he was like Caligula or
They
Nero.
wanted to enact the 25th Amendment.
I know that what, exactly. All of that going on. And I come back to this. There were no disasters at all under his watch. I mean, you know, everything, nothing really bad happened. I mean, I say that I didn't agree with everything Trump did. I mean, there were things that he did, especially with Iran, which I totally did not agree with.
And Syria, Soleimani.
And
There were
Syria,
times when things got tense. But he was always able to rein it back in. Yeah,
he pulled it back, and he understood the importance of talking to people, of meeting with people. He spoke to Putin, and my God, they went after him because he did that. He got on with Xi Jinping in person, even though there were very tense relations with China. He was prepared to talk to Kim Jong-un. He was even prepared to talk directly, person to person, to the Taliban. And he had much more of a flair and instinct for foreign policy than anybody was prepared to admit to. And he's gone, and the so-called adults in the room came in. And as we see, they made a total, complete and utter mess. And that's just in 6 months. Or is it 7 months? I mean, 7 months. And, we got 3+ years ahead. 3.5 years ahead. It's not going to get better.
Yeah. F.L. McKenzie says, and now Biden wants to give the Taliban money. Do you think this may be to preempt a potential hostage situation? Thanks. For a lot of reasons. Can I just add on to the super chat before you answered, Alexander? I'm going to add on that the United States, the Biden White House, is going to have to pay off everybody, not only the Taliban. They're going to have to pay off every single ally, every single European government and minister, every single business person in the EU, in Australia, in Canada. They're going to have to pay off everybody to stay on side and stay loyal to the US's sphere of influence. They're going to have to pay off everybody.
I know, absolutely. And can I just say also, paying off the Taliban at this time in that way is to set oneself up for blackmail. We've said this before in another program. You start giving the Taliban money and saying, please, we'll give you money, but don't, go off after Americans. Don't, get yourself involved with Al Qaeda, with all these people. What are the Taliban going to do? They're not fools. They're going to say, well, thanks, we just had your, 1 billion. Now we want another 1 billion more, because you see, we got this person, Aymar al-Zarqawi from, Al Qaeda, and he's knocking on the door. So we're going to keep him away. We need at least another $1 billion to explain to our people why we should. And it will go on like that. They will go on extorting money from the United States indefinitely, because it'll be a nice racket for them. That's how, I mean, put yourself, pay the blackmail money before you've even been blackmailed. I mean, it's the most utterly bizarre and crazy thing you could possibly do, and do that, by the way, at the same time as you're freezing the money in the central bank. I mean, it's not joined up. It doesn't make sense. It's again an example of the shambles that is in charge in Washington. We said right at the beginning, after the new administration came in, that there's a vacuum of power in Washington. There's nobody really in control, nobody making the decisions. The president is a dud, the vice president is a dud, the Secretary of State doesn't know his job, the Jake Sullivan has never, the National Security Advisor has never held down a proper job, as far as I can see, and they're all getting it wrong. They don't know what they're doing. They are behaving like a bunch of school kids trying to run the foreign policy of the most powerful country on earth. It's a disaster, however you look at it.
Yeah, Leafy Bug says the U.S. freezing Afghanistan's forex reserves seems absurd, given that the U.S. is also begging the Taliban for favors.
Yeah.
Or at least soon will be. At the end of the day, however, $7 billion is not that much money.
No,
I'm sure the Chinese and the Russians would be willing to give the Afghan government a decent line of credit in return for responsible behavior. That's an excellent point.
Absolutely, quite true. Just think about it. And this is a point which I made previously. $7 billion isn't very much. Apparently, the total amount of money held in the central bank was $9 billion. This is after, what was it, 2.7 trillion or 1.7 trillion or 1 trillion or whatever
it is, triple it.
Poured into the country. So all that money went in. And what's left? 9 billion or 7 billion. I mean, it's just, I mean, what does that tell you? Well, you're absolutely right. It's not a lot of money. The Chinese and the Russians will open lines of credit. Of course, it will be hedged with conditions. They're not just paying people to giving the Taliban cash and saying, well, please don't come after our people. They're not going to set themselves up for blackmail in that way, but they can certainly make up the difference, and they will. I mean, that's actually important, though, for the Taliban, because bear in mind, Afghanistan runs a trade deficit. The currency isn't very strong anyway. There's a political crisis. And of course, the money in the central bank, which is the only money at the moment, has been frozen. Unless they handle this well over the next few weeks, they will face a financial crisis. And that could result in inflation and even hyperinflation, which could destabilize the situation in the cities and might even start to affect people in the countryside. So this puts pressure on the Taliban to work with the Chinese and the Russians to sort things out. And it puts pressure on them to come up with a sensible, moderate, measured, intelligent, joined up government. I don't think this is why the US has done it. As I said, I think it's a case of one hand doing one thing, the other hand doing something else. I don't think they know what they're doing in Washington, but it is something the Taliban need to think about and address and work with over the next few weeks.
Yeah, Hunger says, one party I don't see getting enough blame for the Afghanistan debacle is the media and academia. Politicians are obviously not high IQ. Academia formulated this ideology and the media distributed it. Yeah, academia,
absolutely.
Think tanks, all these guys.
And can I just say also, and this is by the way, you're absolutely right.
And they made a lot of money.
And they made a lot of money. All those journalists who came out and praised all these, democracy promotion enterprises and exercises that were being done. I mean, they really have failed utterly, and you don't see any of them coming forward and admitting that they got it wrong. I mean, it's been a disgraceful display. In Britain, only one journalist I know who did that, and that's a journalist called Polly Toynbee in The Guardian. And she did it in such a mealy-mouthed way that you could see that she did it without any real conviction. But can I just say, and this is a personal thing, the other people who failed and failed abysmally are certain parts of the legal profession who have come up very much for the humanitarian intervention nonsense and have been subverting the whole concept of international law and have come up with these bizarre and outlandish theories like responsibility to protect, R2P, and the idea that, you know, you've got some kind of moral duty to go into countries and change the situation there, and that this is somehow your legal responsibility to do also. I know exactly whom I'm talking about. I know some of those people listen to my programs. And I hope they're listening now, because they have disgraced themselves in this affair.
The Samantha Power doctrine.
The Samantha Power doctrine. Right? There have been plenty of people in Britain who've been doing it as well. One particular Chambers in Britain, which I had some dealings with in the past. I hope people from there are listening, because they've disgraced themselves in this affair, and they own this debacle, which we're seeing now.
Bam, the Oracle laying down the hammer. Awesome. Awesome. Rich says Italy, Greece, Belarus, Serbia are going to be at the receiving end of the people from Central Asia, and Draghi is opening Italy to them.
Well, indeed, absolutely. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, Alex said in another program we did recently that the migrant flows are baked in the cake, and they are. I mean, this is the situation. And by the way, Wang Yi, in that conversation he had with Dominic Raab of Britain, he actually brought up the question of migrant flows and about the importance of trying to work with the Taliban to prevent these migrant flows happening. And I suspect, because one of the terrible things about that readout between Wang Yi and Dominic Raab is you know what Wang Yi said to Dominic Raab, but there is no indication of any response from Dominic Raab in return. You don't get any sense that he was receptive to any of this. And, you know, we will see refugee flows. And I think Tucker actually put it very well in a recent thing. What you get is we invade those countries, and the result is that all these people pour out of these countries and, metaphorically speaking, invade us. I don't like using the word invade, because obviously they're not doing that, but you know, in terms of the effect on our countries, it's going to be a radical one. And some of those people who are coming with those refugee flows will come with ideas and attitudes and politics and connections to all sorts of dangerous groups. And well, we can just imagine what's going to happen.
Yeah, things are going to change. Youngblood coming in with the $49.99 super chat, and Youngblood's also dropping the hammer. He says the G7 leaders couldn't kiss Biden's butt enough a few months ago. Don't complain. And now, yeah, they were, yeah, they were kissing his butt. Yeah, they were. You know, they didn't want to call out. Not at all. They were just drooling over the whole, you know, America's back thing. We talked about that. It was America is back, everybody.
America is back.
There you go. There you go, everyone at the G7. Bunch of fucking
well, can I just say, actually, I mean, we did a really fun video a little while back about Kamala Harris going to Vietnam. America is back and all the rest. But the US has been making a real pitch to win over the Southeast Asian states, Vietnam and all the rest, in the great duel that the United States now has with China in the Pacific. Why would Vietnam now, after seeing these events in Kabul, which of course must remind the Vietnamese also of what happened in Saigon in 1975, why would the Vietnamese think that in a crisis with China, the United States is reliable? Already it's known that the Vietnamese had doubts. They already got the flavor of what this administration was all about. They'd had visits from people like Austin, and they weren't apparently impressed by what the people they met and the sort of things they heard. Well, after this disaster, after this debacle, the Vietnamese will probably want to have absolutely nothing to do with the US. And that's another consequence of what's just happened. I'm just going to try and close the window because it got...
Go ahead. Close it up.
Yeah.
Close it up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aussie Male Tuber, for the $5 super chat. Thank you very much for that. And let's see, where are we here? Oh, I just lost the super chats.
Oh,
one sec. Mm-hmm. Ken Goodman says, thanks, guys. God bless. Thank you very much, Ken. Where was I? Ay. 1 second, guys. Congrats on the 150 subs. We already did that. Here we are. Amrit. Soviet Union didn't leave like jokers. More successful.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I remember the event well. First of all, I mean, they took their time to do it. I mean, it was very carefully staged. There was a long negotiation in Geneva. They spoke to the US. They spoke to the Mujahideen. They worked with Pakistan. They arranged a very structured withdrawal. And of course, they didn't leave like thieves in the night. As I said, they went out, bands playing, troops marching, soldiers, with their flags and with their generals there. I even remember to this day the name of the very impressive Russian general who was in charge of the whole operation, Boris Gromov. And you could see that he was an incredibly professional and brave soldier who was there, involved in everything, and was apparently the very last person to cross the bridge, across the river, which separated the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. It was carried out with great dignity, out in the open, and with enormous efficiency. And of course, they'd already previously trained the Afghan army, and they'd done it properly. And that army went on fighting, and the government that they left behind survived for 3 years and only fell after the Soviet Union itself had collapsed. So the contrast is astonishing, and it was a masterclass as to how it should be done. And it's the one that this administration failed to follow.
Yeah. Boris says, Negarosa says, Europe, Russia, China equals prosperity.
Well,
the possible one belt, one road, if China gets more of Europe on board, if they get Europe on board. But, those chances have just increased, Alexander, now with this debacle.
They have increased.
There are going to be a lot of countries in Europe, some countries in Europe that are now going to look a little bit more closely at one belt, one road.
Absolutely, and entirely so. I mean, already Italy has had connections with China. There's been some tensions now, and of course Germany has very strong connections with China, which has been reluctant to break. And Germany is the pivotal country. But I mean, when we talk about Europe, I mean, to be very clear, the situation in Europe is every bit as much of a mess as it is in the US. If you want to find a political leader who perhaps beats the US president in the incompetence stakes, well, just look no further than Ursula, because she probably is the world champion of this.
Yeah. From Hunger, America is not a force for good in today's world, bringing the most cowardly male refugees to the West while turning a blind eye to the SCX abuse of young boys in Afghanistan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's again, we have to be very careful because of what our platform wants us to say. But can I just say that was all discussed in very, very great detail in an article in the New York Times, and about how the US military were under instructions to look the other way as senior Afghan officials did some things which I'm not going to describe, but which were just beyond belief, frankly, of exactly the nature that you mentioned in that question. I have to be careful because, I mean, on top of everything else, we are hampered in discussing this great catastrophe by rules which are just ludicrous, if I may say so.
Leave it there. The super chat noted. Thank you very much, Hunger, for that great super chat. And Sentinel says the Oracle of London is in beast mode today.
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
Well,
Zod the God says, what books should an aspiring lawyer read? I've already read Blackstone.
Well, Blackstone was the great Bible in the 18th and 19th century. The great problem with legal books, I'll tell you straightforwardly this, is that modern legal books are written in a language that is almost be impenetrable even for lawyers. If you want to, if you're restless and you want to, fall asleep at night, read legal books because, to be straightforward about it, they are not really the most helpful. I think the better thing to do is put aside the legal books and actually go to the court decisions. And if you want to get a sense of international law, the right place to go is the International Court of Justice in The Hague. They have produced some absolutely outstanding jurisprudence. And look, first of all, for the court decision on Nicaragua that was made in the 1980s, which already made it absolutely clear that sponsoring insurgent groups in another country is aggression against that country. It was a court decision that the United States ignored, but which is absolutely fundamental in understanding what regime change and all of that's contrary to international law. And also look at the advisory opinion on Kosovo, a legal decision, by the way, which I did not agree with, but which does go into great detail about the law of self-determination, rules of self-determination, and how that works with the UN chapter and UN Charter. And it's extremely erudite and really very interesting and very important. And of course, do also read the UN Charter itself. It's written in clear and simple language. And again, that is the foundation document of modern international law. So that's where I would go. I would ignore the legal books. There are some very good books on international law, but as I said, they're all written in this very difficult language. And there are some manuals and encyclopedias which you can also find. But start with those two court judgments and go to the UN Charter. And that will already give you, I think, a good working base to understand what those legal textbooks, if you want to go to them, are telling you.
All right. Amrit says Toyota Hilux is one of the best military vehicles, Japanese engineering for wars around the world. The Taliban loves them. Quite effective against the Prof armies.
Well, indeed. Well, so it would seem. I mean, they seem to work better than the.
They got all the weapons. Yeah.
Well, now, absolutely, they got those. They got the Humvees as well. Lots of them. 2,500 of them, it would seem.
Crazy. It's just crazy.
Not just the Humvees, but all sorts of other things. And apparently biometric technologies and all kinds of things, which they probably can't really work with, but which you can be absolutely sure the Russians and the Chinese will be all over in the next few weeks.
Yeah. No Mayor One says, is there any chance the U.S. withdrew in this way and deliberately causing this disarray specifically to cause a big problem for Russia and China? In the end, this was their intention in the 80s. There are a lot of there's some people that are saying that this was done in order to destabilize the underbelly of Russia and perhaps throw a wrench at One Belt, One Road.
I think there might have been some people in the US who thought that way. But even if that is so, that doesn't explain or justify the chaos of the last few days. I mean, you can withdraw, you can leave behind all sorts of problems which will create chaos and trouble in the region and which will cause massive problems potentially for the Russians and the Chinese. But there's no need, if you want to pursue that kind of policy, for you to humiliate yourself as well with these impossible scenes that we've been seeing over the last week. So, I mean, if there was a plan, if there was a cunning plan, the execution has been absolutely terrible. And of course, the Russians and the Chinese are not fools, and they're very well aware of these dangers. And that's why they're talking to the Taliban now. And that's why they're trying to work with the Taliban to the extent that they can to bring the Taliban round and to get the Taliban to organize this government, which I think they hope will bring some stability and peace to the country.
All right. Flying Boar says, I think Biden has been set up in Afghanistan by his own people, so this could be used as an excuse to remove him and bring in Kamala Harris.
Can I just say, Alex has also floated this idea, and it's a very plausible one, in my opinion, that, you know, you isolate the old man, you create speculations about him. I mean, there are now articles appearing. I mean, you know, there's people are talking about the 25th Amendment. There's been articles in the Washington Examiner, you know, what is wrong with Joe Biden? What is wrong with the president? I've been seeing all of this sort of thing, that he's out of touch, that he doesn't have any real control over things, that he's no longer in a position to lead. And so this prepares the ground for the transition. Problem is that Kamala has failed herself completely and utterly in this affair. I mean, again, I saw, and this was admittedly the Washington Examiner, which is a Republican outfit, but they asked the question, is this the worst vice president ever? Because where is she?
Well, she's trying to distance herself. Yeah.
I know. But how can you distance yourself? I mean,
it's the wrong move.
Yeah, it is the wrong move. You are the vice president of the United States. I mean, in a crisis, people look. If you want to be president, they look to you to see if you have that ability to provide leadership. If you're running away, if you're hiding so that no blame will attach to you, then frankly, they will say to themselves, rightly, this person is not a leader.
They're very flippant in their responses that they give to the press about the military vehicles or about Bagram airfield or the Americans that are still stuck there. They're very flippant in their responses. They seem like they just really don't care. I've been watching Psaki and Sullivan and Kirby, and they really don't look like people who have been up all night, are trying to fix things, are stressed out about it. Not at all. No. And if you really wanted to reassure the American people that the country's going to be okay, that leadership is in place, that even this was a mistake, a mess up, but we've got it back under control, that we're going to handle things, then you have the vice president, the second in command, standing side by side, along with everyone else, with their president, united together, trying to solve this. None of that is happening. Absolutely. Not one bit of that is happening. And that's why I always default back to say, this is about demoralization. And they're really trying to demoralize the American people and the world. And everyone is just trying to save their political career. They don't want to save America. They want to save their own personal hides.
Absolutely correct. That's entirely true. By the way, I mean, I was watching just last night an interview that Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Rhodes Scholar, person of enormous academic attainment, apparently, was giving. And again, I found it absolutely bizarre. He was saying, we always send helicopters between the embassy and the airport, and all is well, and everything's going according to plan, and everything is fine. And you just left yourself wondering, what planet is this man on? And people who must be looking at this all over the United States must be asking themselves, the same question. This administration is coming across looking like a ship of fools, because that's how they are. And that must be demoralizing the country. That must be giving people in the United States a sense that this isn't the United States. This isn't the country of JFK, of people like that who did know how to get a grip on the situation around them. And is this intentional? Is this planned? Or is this just incompetence?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
from Heyman, super chat, what may be the solution? Communist revolution or nationalist revolution? Government restrictions or restructuring the way corporates cooperate internationally?
Well, if we're talking about the United States, what the people of the United States need to do is to work to restore their republic, to have politics that are conducted in the open, to have the constitution working and operating properly again, to return to the United States as it used to be not so long ago when things actually worked. That's not such an impossible thing to do. All the laws, all the structures are still there. But that means getting rid of all the people who have managed to get themselves into the bureaucracy, into this alphabet soup of intelligence agencies, none of which, it seems to me, is remotely fit for purpose. It means reorganizing and shaking out the courts and getting proper judges, not politicians and Democratic Party hacks in place. It means getting a proper, well carried through purge of Congress and of the lobby groups that infest it worked out. In other words, what you need to do is to drain the swamp. It didn't happen under Donald Trump, but that's what you need to do. And it's absolutely clear that one individual like Trump can't do it by himself. He needs a political movement to do it. And that's what Americans need to do. Whether it will happen, whether it can happen, that's entirely something I can't predict. I mean, I don't have that kind of prophetic power. Nobody does. But if you ask me what needs to happen, that's what needs to happen. The material, the structures, the laws are all there. What you have to do is to give substance to them again.
Aussie Mail Tuber says, thanks, gentlemen. I think the U.S. has collapsed and the COOF lockdowns leave Taiwan, Australia, and New Zealand open for uncontested invasion.
Well, the Chinese, when talking about Taiwan, they're already giving warnings to Taiwan. You can't rely on the United States. Look at what's happened in Afghanistan. And we now have Chinese jets flying ever closer to Taiwan, probing Taiwan's defenses. And the Chinese are becoming ever more assertive there. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. I think if the Chinese invaded Taiwan, tried to occupy Taiwan, I think they would come up against a lot of resistance.
Too hard.
I mean, I don't think they would just be able to walk in. I mean, I don't think that is the way it would work. But I think the Chinese know that. What their plan is not to just march into Taiwan in that way. I think they want to gradually engulf Taiwan, cut off its connections, weaken its political system, and eventually draw it in. And I think they're playing a much longer and more subtle game than just saying that they're just going to walk in and take it over like that.
Yeah. Violin Merchant said, a follow-up, could Greg Kolomoisky actually play basketball, or did the other team let him win because his dad owned half of Cleveland?
I didn't know any of this.
I haven't been following the NBA for a while, Violin Merchant. No, I don't know. Is Kolomoisky's son in the NBA?
I had no idea. I don't know. No idea.
Let me know if he's on Cleveland. Is he playing for the Cavs? Are they still called the Cavs? Because I know the Indians changed their name from the Indians to the Gladiators. So I don't know. Anyway, thanks for the super chat, Violin Merchant. From Rocky Lux, for years, I listened to Biden's malicious hate speeches against the Serbs and chilled watching him smirk at NATO's atrocities against Serbia. So having the U.S.'s failure in Afghanistan rightly blamed upon him is absolutely just. Well,
I can see a lot of people think that. I mean, obviously, I should say, I mean, when it comes to Biden, I've never been any kind of supporter. I've never thought that he was remotely the right person to be president. And I remember all those awful comments he made about the Serbs and the role he played in that war and the role a lot of other people played in that war, including a lot of the politicians and journalists and writers who are now busy lamenting the disaster in Afghanistan, in Britain today. Let's say that. But we have to also consider that while it might be justice to see Biden humbled in this fashion, it's also been a great debacle for his country, which is the United States. And we mustn't allow, I think, entirely justifiable feelings about Biden blind us to the fact that it is the United States that's been really hurt. Biden is one individual, and we all know what I think about him, about his role in Ukraine, for example, his role in the Serb wars, his family connections, the kind of things he's been doing. Again, I'm choosing my words extremely carefully. So justice for him, but a terrible blow for the United States. And we mustn't overlook that.
And we documented, God, for
Absolutely.
a year during the campaign, Biden, Hunter Biden, everything that went on in Ukraine. God knows how many videos did we do on Ukraine and Burisma and everything that was going on there. And we did many videos on Biden and Serbia as well.
And,
many videos,
and we don't regret it, and we don't, and you know, we would do it again. Save, of course, bear in mind, you know, people have been congratulating us on getting to 150 subs. Well, one of the reasons it took us as long to do it, to get there as it did, was partly because we highlighted all these things. So there are consequences, but we will go on taking those consequences, because otherwise, well, what's the point of what we do?
Yeah. James Ferguson says, how can the CIA not be called out about this fiasco?
Well, it should be called out. The entire intelligence community should be called out. I mean, they believe or pretend to believe Christopher Steele and his ludicrous, phony, crappy dossier, and they get the whole of the United States mesmerized for 4 years about it, and they let a debacle like Afghanistan work its way through. And, you know, they're all now rushing and saying, well, you know, we gave the president the correct advice and he wasn't listening. And the fact is, until, you know, the day before Kabul fell, they were saying it would take 90 days, and it didn't take 90 days. It took 6 hours or something like that. And if they were giving the president the correct advice and he wasn't heeding it, well, all I will say is, where were all these anonymous officials who leak all that information to the, you know, the Washington Post and the New York Times, and tell us about the fact that the president isn't listening to the intelligence? I mean, you get anonymous officials spreading false stories, like the Russians paying the Taliban bounties to kill Americans, and then that's done in order to damage Donald Trump. And that happens during the election. But you don't see any anonymous sources coming along and saying anything at all about the evidence, the information that the current president isn't listening to.
Very good. Was it not just 6 months ago, 9 months ago?
Yeah.
How long ago? A year ago? I don't know. But I guess I'm looking at time like Biden looks at time. 2 days ago, 5 days ago. But look, we had that story about Trump from Afghanistan, that Trump was paying off, that the Russians were paying off the Taliban to take out American soldiers. Anonymous sources. Where were those anonymous sources telling the American people, telling the New York Times and Washington Post that Afghanistan is going off the rails? Where were those anonymous sources that had such detailed knowledge about what the Taliban was doing? They were so embedded in Afghanistan that they knew this very detail, that the Taliban was actually getting paid by Russia to take out American soldiers. But they had no idea that all of this was going to happen. Those wonderful anonymous sources. That's all my point. Just, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the intelligence community in the United States is not an intelligence community at all. It's a political outfit and a branch of the Democrat Party. I mean, I think that has to be said because it's true.
Where am I here? Mark Hewitt, if you were the French military, would you be pushing for an EU army or closer ties with the UK military after the debacle in Afghanistan?
Well, obviously the second. I mean, what the French military is about the one military in the EU which is fit for purpose. I mean, it's actually they've got a good air force, they've got a good fleet, they've got some very good infantry regiments, they've got the Foreign Legion, they've got the paratroopers, they've got a real military. and it comes with a tremendous military tradition extending back to Napoleon, Louis XIV, whatever. And of course, the British military, there is a real military there. Britain and France together, that is a convincing military partnership. And it makes far more sense than the kind of European army that Macron is talking about. If that European army were ever created, what it would do, it would take the French military, which is a viable institution with a very high esprit and tremendous traditions, and it would submerge it in the usual EU homogenizing, pasteurized glob, which is the militaries of all of the other EU countries. It would wipe out the French military as an effective force. So it's a disastrous idea. Macron is one of those people who pretends to be clever and manages to be always wrong.
Rich says, when Soviets fight Taliban, they are freedom fighters. When the U.S. does, Taliban are terrorists.
Well, true. Absolutely right. I mean, the fact is, in those days, they were already much closer to being the second than the first. But of course, that was not what we were told at the time.
I said that during, we were talking about that during the Viva Frey.
Exactly.
Stream.
Exactly.
About Mujahideen and Taliban and all those things back in the day. Let's see. Irish Partisan says, Trump was the most honest U.S. president in recent history. Quote, we are taking Syria's oil, end quote. No liberal, fluffy talk coding U.S. imperialism and militarism.
You're absolutely right. And can I just say, I always found that refreshing. But of course, the political class in Washington hated him for it. They hated the fact that he talked in that kind of way.
Not that his statement was good. You're not condoning
I'm not condoning his statement in any way. But as I said, the fact that he talked in a straightforward way that people could understand, and which is unambiguous in that way, and the political class hated it. They were very happy to take Syria's oil, but they didn't like it to be said in that straightforward, blunt fashion. For them, it always has to be covered up with cliches and bromides about, how we're protecting the oil of the Syrian people from the predatory Syrian government. And, this is all being done for humanitarian and philanthropic purposes as part of our great democracy promotion mission. He never used that kind of language, and they never forgave him for it.
Yeah. GEC says, agree with Alex regarding demoralization. Remember the video about the Great Reset talking about how world powers will be shared between 7 or so countries.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. And very good point, actually. Yes.
And they don't hide it.
No.
They don't hide the Great Reset stuff at all.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, they don't. No. To a bizarre extent, they're open about it, actually.
Yeah. Trudeau did a video about it, saying this is our opportunity.
Yeah.
He said it. Simon Ennifer says Kabul could become America's Dien Phu.
Well, that was something that Scott Ritter wrote about. I mean, he said that Kabul airport is surrounded, as I said, by high ground and built up areas. Now, Dien Phu, for those who don't know, was a battle fought in Vietnam during the Indochina War between the French, who were the colonial power, and the Viet Minh, who were an earlier version of the Viet Cong. It's the same people, in fact, led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh was a communist, but he was also the national leader of the Vietnamese, who was fighting French colonialism. And the French tried to maintain their empire in Indochina and Vietnam after the Second World War, and they were encircled by the Vietnamese army, the Viet Minh, in a place called Dien Bien Phu, and there was an absolutely epic battle in 1954, and eventually the French were forced to surrender, and it was a humiliating defeat for the French, and it was the beginning of the end of France's colonial empire. And the point that Scott Ritter is making, and this point that this viewer is also making, is that Kabul airport is very similar. The geography is very similar to Dien Bien Phu, in that just as Dien Bien Phu lent itself to an encirclement by the Vietnamese of the French military who were there, so Kabul airport, the geography lends itself to an encirclement by the Taliban. So the Taliban have the Americans exactly where they would want them if they really did want to inflict a humiliating defeat on the US. So airplanes that have to land on Kabul airport have to go over high ground where the Taliban could put surface-to-air missiles or even heavy caliber machine guns, which would be very dangerous with the planes. And of course, because they control the high ground around, it would be very easy for them to lob mortar bombs and grenade launchers, shells, and all that sort of thing on the American troops that are there. It's a trap. It is actually, in military terms, a trap.
All the more reason that they shouldn't have given up the Bagram airfield. Anyway, I mean, Alexander, do you think Dominique Raab will resign?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think that, you know, they will try and they always avoid this. Johnson's habit is he never lets people resign when the crisis hits, and then eventually, after a couple of months, we see the person who's been the target of the criticism, he's gradually shifted out. And that happened with Dominic Cummings, and it happened with our health minister, whose name, the former health minister, whose name has just escaped me. But I think we will see the same. I think Dominic Raab is probably a dead man walking, but he will remain foreign secretary for at least a while.
Yeah, Kurt says, it's unbelievable to hear officials raising concerns about missing Vax drive in Afghanistan less than 5 days after a 21-year-long occupation. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it gets ever more surreal, actually.
Yeah, Biden talking about the coup for Stephanopoulos. I mean, just anyway, it's crazy. It's crazy. Thank you, Kurt, for that. Susan says, can't even believe what the military says anymore. The last man standing has fallen. So without honest representatives and or the media, what do we do?
Well, I have to say, the way in which the military have tumbled in the US for the agenda. I mean, we know what agenda I'm talking about. The agenda, the way in which General Milley talks about, you know, how he's going to be this modern general who's going to reform the military to follow these particular lines that the Democratic Party has been advocating, and how the real enemy isn't abroad, it's at home. I mean, that astonished me. I would have thought the one place where those kind of ideas would meet the most resistance would be the military itself. And I cannot believe that most of the men and women who are in the US military, who are patriotic and loyal to the United States and take seriously their oath to the Constitution, are happy with any of that.
Yeah. From Cuckoo747, we got a super sticker. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. From Cosmic Rain, just a small donation. Thanks, lads, for allowing me to help out. Love to support you guys. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much, Cosmic Rain, for that. And we are happy that you've got a wrench. Good to have you here with us. Bradley Rogers sends us $5. Thank you very much, Bradley, for that. Let's see. Lachette, new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Lachette. Deadbeat Don says, regarding YT subs, I'm convinced that paying the premium puts me under the oversight of a better algorithm. The days are probably numbered, but I still consider my monthly tribute worth it. Thank you very much for that super chat. It's an interesting take on the algorithm. I might try that out. Thank you very much for that. And Heyman says, Afghanistan just told the world to stay home and keep social distancing. Being a dictator is hard, but trying to be a global rainbow dictator is harder.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. I love that. I absolutely love it. Fantastic.
And I got all the super chats. I got a lot of questions from the live stream as well, Alexander. theduran.locals.com. Let's see if there's any questions there.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting one. Trump's honest statement in response to a journalist when they were talking about how Putin's a monster. Remember when Trump shot back and said, "And you think we're such angels?" Remember that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they did not like that.
No, they didn't like that at all. Not that they ever came up with any convincing pushback against it. I mean, they didn't refute what he said. They never can. That was the thing about Trump. The things that they really, what he would say that would really make them mad was not the things that you hear about, that silly story about the bleach, for example, injecting yourself with bleach, which he never said. Those things were all invented and they were absolute nonsense. The things that Trump said that really annoyed them, that infuriated them, was when he was telling things as they were. When he was telling the facts. Do you remember those comments he made during the inaugural address about crime in US cities and about the violence there? The C word, which again, because of our friends, I'm not going to repeat because they get very touchy when one does. But what's been happening in American cities over the last few months? What's been happening since the new administration took off? Just look at the crime and homicide figures. He was saying it as it was. These people don't do that. They engage in this absolutely confected language, full of cliches, full of, as I said, absurd language. Doesn't mean any sense, but of course it ticks all the right boxes, and that's what they're really concerned about.
Violin Merchant Super Chat says, did we ever find out why Fruman was recording the dinner where Trump fired Jovanovich?
No.
No, we didn't. We never found out anything about.
We never found anything.
Supposedly he's like, I think he's trying to investigate some more people or something. I read a couple of articles about that, but I just don't know what to believe anymore about.
I
Duran
don't. No, I don't either. We know absolutely. Can I just say? I mean, one of the most interesting developments is that Vindman. You remember him, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, he who told us that the entity, the deep state, which we're told doesn't exist, not only does exist, but he even gave us its name, which is the interagency, which we've subsequently found out is what these people call themselves. Anyway, him who was behind the first impeachment, he's been giving all kinds of interesting interviews, and he's got a book out, and he quite openly says that he saw his job as protecting the current incumbent in the White House, Donald Trump's successor, the man who has presided over this disaster in Afghanistan, Joe Biden. And he says it quite openly, and he makes it quite clear that he was the person ultimately who was behind everything that led up to that first impeachment. It's fascinating to see how he's been coming out and saying all sorts of things. And it tells you a great deal about what was going on during the period when Trump was president. Nothing like that so far, despite all the disasters that we've been talking about on this program with the present president. He is not the target, so far as we know, to anything of the same kind of plotting.
Yeah, the interagency.
Straight
out of a James Bond flick.
Absolutely.
Or an Austin Powers movie, depending on which way you look at it. Yeah. Winston says, great to see you on Viva Frey. I hope that becomes a regular thing. We hope so too, guys. If you haven't subscribed to Viva Frey's channel, we highly recommend it. Great channel. Robert Barnes' channel as well. And they're on Locals. I mean, they're doing great work. Dan Noya says, what if the Taliban are actually the good guys? We know the poppy fields are funding black ops. We know Biden ignored the May 1st deadline. Biden's brother made zillions from housing there.
There are no good guys, and we shouldn't talk about the Taliban as being good guys. There are bad guys and there are worse guys, and we have to be realistic and work with what is. Now, the Taliban is there. The Chinese and the Russians say you have to work with them, and you have to try and work with them to try and establish something that is stable and peaceful, and out of which something good may come. And frankly, I think pursuing that kind of realist approach to Afghanistan is far more likely to bear fruit than all this democracy promotion nonsense, which is what Wang Yi told Dominic Raab in that telephone call just didn't work, that it was a total disaster which was bound to fail.
Thank you, Dan, for that super chat. And Dan has another super chat which says, we gave up the air bases, stopped supplying intelligence. The Air Force could stop the Taliban dead in its tracks. Yeah. Why are they suddenly believing the news? Why are we suddenly believing the news? Why did Castro, actually means Trudeau, that's funny, Castro, but Trudeau, he spells it. He spells it Castro, but it's Trudeau, in Canada, call Hillary? Why did Trudeau call Hillary? That's interesting.
I do not believe the news. I think you're right to be skeptical. I mean, I don't know what to believe about many things. And the whole military response to Afghanistan, the whole way in which the whole thing was run is astonishing. But all I will say is this, if somebody plays the fool in a situation like the one we've seen in Afghanistan, as the current administration has done, even if they're doing it according to some cunning plan that they have or that somebody has foisted on them, well, playing the fool in that way simply proves that at the end of the day, you are a fool. Nobody should go out of their way to humiliate their own country in the way that the United States has been humiliated this week. I mean, that is something that no statesman, whatever cunning plan they might have, might do, should ever do. Now, why did they give up the air bases? I simply cannot understand. I mean, I think there ought to be a proper inquiry. I think, frankly, Congress is wasting its time looking at what happened on a certain event in Capitol Hill in January, which is a complete nonsense. We've got a proper police and criminal investigations which should be allowed to take their course. They would be far better advised to ask questions about this debacle, but of course they won't.
Nope, they won't. And someone in the live stream says, please, Canada, don't re-elect Trudeau.
Absolutely. Here.
Yeah.
I often say, can I just say, I often say about elections in other countries, well, I don't have a vote there, so I'm not going to say whom I would vote for or not vote for. Canada, I have to say, is the exception to the rule. I absolutely know whom I would be voting against. Let me put it as simply as that.
Dan Noya says, I think the point is to stabilize Afghanistan and cut off illicit funding to the deep state.
Absolutely.
Completely. Yeah, that's going to be what happens.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well said, Dan.
Exactly.
Well said. And Alan, we'll take a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up, everybody. Alan says, Wang Yi is becoming the diplomat of the century. Actually, it's a really astute observation, Alan, because Wang Yi, you never heard that name. You never knew much about the Chinese foreign diplomats or the team in and around Xi, even 2 years ago. But now they're starting to really make themselves known. And it's interesting to see that. And it's deliberate. It's not, I mean, they want to get out in front of the public now.
And they're coming
before
out.
They were just kind of hidden.
Exactly. They're coming out of the shadows and they're coming out in force. And I mean, it's something to see, actually. I mean, he is a very impressive foreign minister altogether.
Sky is Falling says the Taliban, quote, Taliban blow apart 2,000 years of Buddhist history. Luke Harding, Sunday, the 4th of March, 2001, theguardian.com. I remember when they blew up those Buddhist statues. The point that we made way in the beginning of the live stream, Alexander, is that it seems, this is where you said 2/3 and 1/3.
Yeah.
It definitely appears like the Russians and the Chinese and perhaps some other countries are mentoring the Taliban so that they don't do stuff like that going forward. And that's where you said 2/3 is listening to the Russians and 1/3 is not.
Yeah. That's what the senior Russian official, his name is Kaburov, and he's the point man who's dealing with the Russian diplomatic effort in Afghanistan, and who talks to the Taliban along with the Russian ambassador in Kabul. They seem to be working not just on behalf of Russia, but even to some extent of China also. And that's what he said, that it's 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 of the people who make up the Taliban are listening. They may not be the nicest, the most sophisticated, the most mature people, but they do understand that they have to listen. 1/3 are, so far beyond reach, and it's far from certain at the moment how this is going to play out. We just have to hope, because it seems to me that if the Russians and the Chinese can succeed, it's the best outcome amongst those we have. A stable, peaceful Afghanistan, even if it's run by, a coalition government cobbled together with the Taliban as part of it, is a far better Afghanistan than an Afghanistan that's at war, run by warlords, run by drug lords, exporting migrants, drugs, and terrorists around the world.
Yeah, and the final super chat from Dan Noya says, by the way, the Dems fractured here in Texas, and we now have a quorum.
Oh, wow. Okay, good.
There you have it. Thank you very much, Dan, for that. All right, we'll wrap it up. I think we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for your questions in the live stream, in the super chat. Thank you to all our moderators, everyone that now has a wrench, Reckless Abandoned Valley S, GEC, Alan Watson. Who else? Am I missing someone? Cosmic Rain. Who else? Maybe I'm missing 1 or 2 people, but I think I got everybody. Thank you very much for moderating the live stream. And the English Loyalist dropped a super chat just now, which says, doesn't this evacuation remind you of Stalingrad? If I saw the U.S. conduct themselves like this, Russia and China seem more inviting.
Yeah, it does. It does a bit. I mean, Stalingrad was an epic battle. It's making that comparison it really is like saying, history repeats itself. The first time as tragedy and the second time as farce. I don't want to deny that there is a huge element of tragedy about the events that we're seeing in Kabul now. I mean, these people falling from planes is just terrible, but there is an element of farce about it also. Whereas Stalingrad was all tragedy, at least as far as the Germans were concerned. Of course, for the Soviets, it was the great triumph, the epic victory they achieved in that war.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it seems to me that we're just at the beginning of this.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Everyone take care and buckle up and be safe, because didn't we talk about the summer? Yeah. Didn't we talk about the summer in many live streams? We said, look out in the summertime. Some stuff always goes down. Some big stuff always goes down.
Absolutely.
And now we have it.
August is always the most dangerous month. It is a historical truism. I mean, academic historians repeat it all the time. This is when big things happen.
All right, Paul Wooten, $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Paul, for that. And Kurt Fram, final super chat. I hear British military commentators saying that after the Afghan debacle, the UK military should never work together with the US again.
Well, I think they say that. I mean, I'm sure they will in practice, but we certainly need to start thinking about running our own foreign policy with our own military. That's better for us. By the way, it's better for the US. I mean, what the US mustn't do is listen to siren voices like Tony Blair coming along and talking the kind of things that he said in that terrible speech he made in Chicago in 1999, when he launched this humanitarian war idea and set that particular terrible ball rolling.
Yeah. And the Duran.locals.com in the Duran Locals live stream that is running parallel to what we have going on here. Sentinel says, women under the Taliban have more freedoms than most people in the West since the coup. In a sarcastic way, it's Sentinel. Very, very clever. Do you, and Tweak says, do you remember when Hillary started pushing the New Silk Road initiative back in 2010-11 and how that plan just seemed to fizzle out only to be replaced by China's New Silk Road just a few years later?
I remember it very well indeed. Hillary, of course, would have had a very different ideas about what the Silk Road, her Silk Road, was all about. And let's suffice.
They wanted like TT. I forgot the names. TTPC or T.
Yes,
I forgot all the different. Yeah.
Suffice to say that it would have been a very, very materially good thing for her and her friends also had it worked out that way. China's Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative is a giant geopolitical, economic operation on a completely different scale, and obviously far more thought through.
All right, we'll leave it there, everybody. Alexander, some final thoughts before we close it out?
All I can say is these are the 7 days, the 10 days that shook the world. I mean, it really has been a tremendous event. And just to repeat again, we're into 7 months of this administration. We've got 3+ years to go. Tighten your seatbelts.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you on Monday or sometime around there with another live stream. We'll see. But take care. Have a great weekend, and thank you to everybody for your questions, and thank you to all the moderators. Take care.